Hello, everyone, and good morning. My name's Toby, and it's great to be your host today here at Innovation Talks Theater. Now, we're so glad that you're able to join us here at Cisco Live 2020 in beautiful Barcelona. There's a lot of us here together, and together we can build the bridge to get you where you want to go so you can make anything possible. At Cisco Live, you'll learn new things, be inspired, and create the path to endless opportunities. This week, we're hosting 14 innovation talks here in this theater, where we'll share with you the latest solutions, innovations, and of course, best practices. Now, today's session looks at the topic of empowering your IT teams to deliver in a hybrid application world. And to tell us all about it, we have two wonderful speakers with us, Liz Centoni and Danny Winokur. First up, please welcome on stage SVP and GM for Cloud, Compute, and IoT, Cisco's Liz Centoni.
Thanks, Toby. All right, good morning. This is right after the keynote. As you can imagine, we had to run through like throngs of people coming here. So good to see you. See some people that I know from prior. So here's what we're going to do. I know on stage, on the main stage keynote, if you had a chance to watch it, we gave you kind of a compressed summary of what we're doing with AppDynamics and Intersight. We're going to go through it in a little bit more detail. We're also going to talk about kind of some of the other things that we're doing, especially on how do we enable enable IT to provide things like container as a service. So that's what we have covered for this 30 minutes or so. So let me start with a couple of few trends that we see in computing. Before when we talked about compute, it was either sitting behind the four walls of your data center, then in terms of what shifted to the cloud. When I think about computing, I look at it as a computing spectrum, everywhere from your IoT edge all the way to the cloud. Now, being in IoT, what we've seen is especially our industrial customers, so think about it as refineries, factories, mines, connecting everything. Now, they're not just connecting everything to be able to automate. They're connecting because they actually want to extract data, and not just in terms of moving that data to the cloud, but how do I compute that data at the edge and get business insights? Like, think about this use case, right? You're in a refinery, and you've got a ton of sensors around that measure everything from gas pressure to flow and everything else. You have a lot of people that work in that refinery. These can be pretty hazardous environments. When there's a gas leak, you don't want to take that data and haul it all the way back to the cloud. You want to be able to compute that information right there, know exactly where your people are with location tracking, and be able to evacuate those people. That is just one use case that I can think of. I'm sure there's multiple use cases that you can think of every single day. So it's not surprising that you see something like 58% of compute and storage will actually reside at the IoT edge and with provider data centers. Now, on the other side, when you take a look at it, it says 90% of our customers, will rely on a mix of resources, whether they sit on premises, in the public cloud, in multiple public clouds, and in your own private cloud as well. So that's from a computing infrastructure standpoint. Let's talk about what does it look like from an application world. I don't need to tell you this, that applications are being built pretty modular. And last year, most applications had 8 dependencies. This year, they have 20 dependencies. Things are getting pretty complicated. And then when you think about it and go, on an average, probably an enterprise has anywhere between 5,000 to 7,000 applications. And that's going to actually double. So at least 2,500 new applications being built. The complexity is something that we need to address from an IT standpoint. Then when you look at it and go, these applications are mostly built using containers. And they're operating more in a hybrid world. And speaking about a hybrid world, the notion of hybrid apps is not an exception. It's actually the norm. One example that I can think of is as more and more as we talk about applications being built in a world using containers, there's still a lot of traditional applications that, yes, they're being refactored, but it's not all being rewritten. The front end, maybe a catalog sits in the public cloud. The back end is still sitting on-prem because data has gravity, not just because of security and control and governance. As I said, some of the data does need to stay on-prem because you want to be able to compute that data where it's generated and get business insights. So it's not surprising to see that 40% of data center investments are going to hybrid apps. So you need to think about, from an IT organization, what does this net out to? I would say 3 things. And Danny and I talked about 2 of those on stage. And I know there's a lot to consume because we covered so much of it on stage because of the number of innovations that are going on within engineering. So we want to take a chance to talk through it in a little bit more detail here. Start talking about apps first, how we're addressing in terms of breaking down the silos between infrastructure operators and app operators. Hybrid apps being the reality, how we're helping you manage in this hybrid multi-cloud environment. And then I want to come back and talk about how we're productizing in a container world. So what is that easy to deploy appliance kind of form factor to help you deliver a container as a service? So I'm going to start off at the application because most often than not, when we talk about in a compute sessions, we start at the infrastructure level. That's a lot of what we're comfortable with. We're going to turn it upside down and start with apps. So Danny, why don't you come in and take it away?
Thanks, Liz. All right. So like Liz said, applications are where modern digital businesses now begin, right? We talked about how applications have moved right into the center of the business. And what we're seeing is a new competitive landscape where every company, it doesn't matter what industry they're in, it could be transportation, it could be healthcare, it could be financial services, every single company has had to figure out how to compete in a world of digital experiences. Because we know from the App Attention Index and some of the data that you may have heard at the keynote this morning, that companies that deliver great digital experiences are quantitatively the winners. And those that fail to deliver the right digital experiences are the losers. And for companies, this becomes existential. It's gotten really hard because, as you see here, the bar has gotten higher and higher and higher. And part of what has set that bar so high is that these digital design-led native organizations, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Ubers of the world, have formed expectations among all of us as individuals around what we expect out of our application environments. And when things fail to deliver, we abandon and go look for the next thing that's better. So here's what makes it a challenge, right? The environments that are necessary to deliver the best experiences end up requiring cloud and distributed microservices. And those environments then end up getting really, really complex because you break down your application into lots of individual components. Those components can now be iterated on very quickly by small, relatively agile teams. That's the upside, and that's what you need to do to iterate and win in a world of experience. You got to move at the speed of business. But the negative downside of it is you end up with this kind of a view in your application estate. You have all these prior generations of technology where you may still have mainframes, you have client-server technologies, and then you have, of course, the web technologies, and now these latest cloud technologies. You put it all together, it has to work seamlessly and flawlessly. It has to be responsive with no downtime so that you can deliver that fantastic experience, because when you don't, the consequences can be quite catastrophic. There is data, depending on which report you read, that 100 milliseconds of latency on your page can cost you 1% of sales. That's from Amazon. There's another report that I just read actually this week that says that number is actually 7% of sales. Either one is a big problem. And downtime incidents that cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars for every single instance add up really quickly when, as we see at many customers, there are downtimes that are occurring, outages that are occurring, in many cases multiple times every single week. So this adds up really, really quickly, and that's not even to mention the cost of actually being in the newspapers, having your customers angry at you, the reputational damage that is done. that is much more difficult to measure. So part of what's going on inside our organizations that lead to these challenges getting worse is not just a technology challenge, but it's also an operating model challenge. We're working in organizations that have historically been very siloed. And so even within our operations teams and our development teams, we see situations still like this at many customers. You go in there and they're dealing with a troubleshooting problem, an outage, an issue. They want to fix it, but they're pointing fingers at each other, right? Hey, my thing looks good. Does your thing look good? Yeah, mine looks good. But the reality is that across the hall, you've got the business leaders who are now relying upon that application as the core business that they're trying to deliver. Every initiative that they try to execute has to be done inside that application. And this is what they're doing. They're pulling their hair out. Business results are suffering, and they're unable to realize the benefits of a great digital experience. So what AppDynamics does is helps to cut through the noise of this problem and bridge these different separate teams so that they actually can come together and look at what we call a business transaction. This is sort of the organizing principle of how we monitor, and it cuts through all of the components that make up this distributed dynamic estate. And it gives you a view that basically represents the path through the application in order to deliver the key outcomes that your users need and expect from the application. And that way, when something goes wrong, you can actually have context for the problem. You understand who it's affecting, what experience it's affecting, what impact is it going to have, and you can therefore prioritize and actually determine root cause through anomaly detection and root cause analysis that is supported within the context of this business transaction. Now, part of what makes AppDynamics special is our ability to not only correlate traditional views of technical performance of your application, but for quite some time, we've extended that to also give you a clear view of business impact, right? So that you can now see not only technical indicators, KPIs, but you can also see business indicators that you define yourself for whatever your business is. So you can say, if you're in retail, I want to know what are the SKUs that are being most frequently added to my cart. I want to know how many euros or dollars or pounds are in my cart. I want to know what the checkout rate is or the conversion rate is through my funnel. And you can actually monitor those things in real time. Or as the example we have here, in which we talked about on stage this morning, a financial services application. How many insurance quote dollars are being generated? How many loans are going through? What is the volume going through online bill pay? Today, as you may have heard in the keynote, we announced another new lens, another new correlated experience within AppDynamics. We call this the Experience Journey Map. And what it does is it adds to the view of the business transaction and the business impact capabilities that we have, so that we now, for the first time, and this is unique to any other APM tool, any other application performance management tool, we have the ability to use AI and ML technologies to dynamically map your top user journeys on the front end of the application, literally the screens your users are seeing at the end user experience level, and actually let you see whether the things that are happening on the back end are correlated to the things that are happening on the front end experience. And that becomes an important and powerful new lens because it allows you to prioritize what's really important before you worry about other alarms or alerts that may be going on in the back end that are less important. And so what this does is it helps us begin to change our internal operating model from one that looks like this, where we have separate business development and operations teams who are siloed and unable to achieve the velocity that is needed to win in a digital world that you have to compete on experience, to one that looks more like this, where you have a biz dev ops operating model. These teams work together closely, more collaboratively, and more intimately than they ever have before. And this allows them to gain velocity, and velocity is gold. That's what allows you to actually win, iterate more quickly, and achieve the experiences that allow you to move at the speed of business. So what we announced also this morning is a very, very exciting step on a path that we're pursuing at Cisco, which is to begin bridging across not only the tools at the application layer, but also the tools that go all the way down the stack into every single layer of the infrastructure. Because applications depend on infrastructure in order to work. So the legacy systems that the separate operating teams have historically used are siloed. And they keep the team siloed, right? Because they have different sources of truth, they have different data, and they then end up back in this finger-pointing game because they don't understand what one another is seeing. What we've been doing is working on a journey at Cisco to replace the legacy tools with modern software-based versions that are open, extensible, and interoperable with one another. And what this does is it allows data exchange between the different tools up and down the stack that make it possible to actually assemble a single view that lets you come together and actually have one shared source of truth that you're going to use to determine what's going on so that that finger pointing turns back into a collaborative game, not only at the application layer and with the business, but actually with all of the ops teams that represent the different layers of the stack. So Liz and I thought it would be worthwhile to actually take you through the demo that we did this morning in a little bit more detail, and we can sort of give you a sense for how this actually works in practice. So Liz, you want to come back up?
So Danny, as you were talking about, it's important for us to understand what happens at the application level. I think it's important for all of us, not just for those of you who run IT operations every day, but those of us who actually build the infrastructure as well, right? Most often than not, when we build the infrastructure, we're like, oh, there's people on the application side they can care about. But when you think about it, you're building that infrastructure, you're buying it, you're deploying it in the service of an application. So more and more, what we want to do is look at how do we provide that full stack visibility per se. So maybe we can
so
get
jump
to
in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so if you look here, this is AppDynamics, which is where we'll start at the application layer. And we're in here monitoring this fictional application, Next Gen Financial. And you can see at the very top of the screen, we start with what really ultimately matters to the business, which are the business metrics themselves. So how we're doing on the insurance quotes, how we're doing on our loans and our online bill pay. And below that, we see the business transactions that actually are those building blocks, those pathways through the application, each of which delivers a key outcome. We see a few problems here, but we're not yet sure exactly what is the source of the problem because you're seeing different alarms in different places. So what we want to be able to do is actually correlate across these by looking through the eyes of the actual users and what they're seeing. So I can click on the 450K, and it takes us into the new feature that we launched this morning, which is the experience journey map, right? And that experience journey map uses the AI and the ML that I mentioned to give you these paths through the application, which correspond, as you would expect, to the business metrics that we started with. But now we're seeing them screen by screen by screen, and we can see that really where our problem is in applying discounts. So at the end of that journey, you see the quotes being sent, even though there were alarms about it, it's not actually affecting our users. So there may be a resource issue, but the users aren't actually experiencing it. So that would be the wrong place to start and prioritize our effort. So instead, we're going to dig in to what's really going on with how we apply our discounts. And so we can get a little bit more detail from this view, and then we can go up to our dashboards and reporting view and actually jump in to see what AppDynamics sees beneath it, beneath the application. And there we see the infrastructure components. Again, we see quoting services have a bit of an issue, but we know that really where we need to focus our efforts is on the VMs that are actually alarming for discount services, because that's what our users are struggling with. So this is where we now normally would get stuck. APM tools are normally siloed, separate from infrastructure tools, but you have something new to show us on how we can actually bridge this gap now.
And I will tell you, is before our two teams started working together, I think the concept of like this experience journey maps was pretty alien because you never think about kind of what's happening in the back end of what on the application side, because we're more focused on, like we did when we launched Intersight a few years ago, and we actually have close to 500,000 devices that are connected to it, right? So it's a tool that actually helps you set up and manage your servers, your hyperconverged clusters, your storage arrays. And big focus was around that was how do we troubleshoot the infrastructure?
Right.
So when anything goes wrong, like your DIM in your UCS server, for example, is on the point of failing, it can actually now open up a service request with TAC. It can send the logs. So our focus was very much around let's make sure that the infrastructure is healthy, not thinking about the fact that the infrastructure, the applications are pretty dependent on that infrastructure.
Totally dependent.
Right, and the whole idea was, hey, I'm looking at this within the tools that I have within my area.
Right.
And the idea is somebody is looking at it from the other side. So this is the first time where we actually brought those two tools together, where they're sharing the data.
Yep.
And that's what we showed on main stage as well. And I would say is the new capability of having the workload optimizer provide this dependency graph is something that gives us a visibility in terms of really understanding that if you look at applications, which is at the top of the heap, if I could call it a heap, it's a beautiful dependency
beautiful
graph.
heap. Yeah, exactly.
But at the top of the heap is the application.
Yep.
And you look at the dependency that it pulls together in terms of all the things that it's dependent on. You know, when you look at it, the app servers, the VMs that you're on, and then all the way down to the infrastructure. It's a view that we haven't seen before. I haven't seen anything else in the market that way as well. And the recommendation engine in here is pretty powerful because it is actually going through a lot of these data sets that it's collecting by making API calls. It makes API calls to AppDynamics, other APMs that are out there as well. It makes API calls at the VM layer to every type of x86 machines out there, every single storage array that's out there. And it's actually, it's fascinating how it actually takes the immediate dependency, then it starts building out the dependency across. So it's connecting and correlating all of this to build that dependency graph. So now you're getting a view of it where it shows that, look, it's not all green, right? There's some reds and yellows in there, and it's providing recommendations. So when you talked about, you know, next-gen financial, I mean, the easy thing is with a click of a button, it gives you all the list of those applications.
Yep.
And it's pulling that information out from AppD.
Right, so you've taken the topology data in, and now we have both of our teams in this closed loop operating model looking at that same data and then able to take actions from there to actually troubleshoot the problem like we had with next-gen financial.
And if you look at this, I know we call this a hypothetical because we couldn't use real customer information. We've done that before. But even in this hypothetical model, if you click on that, the beauty of it is it builds that dependency graph just for that specific application. And when you double click on that, it actually gives you granular information. In fact, if I go back, you could see the yellows are just related to the fact that the VMs are not performing as well. They're running hot because of memory congestion. But if you look down below, it shows you everything else in terms of all the other capacity stats look fine. So you can double click now on this and it shows you, let me zoom out a little bit. It actually gets down to details and it makes a recommendation. Increase the allocation, memory allocation by 1 GB.
Yep.
And you can get to optimal performance.
So you must be using machine learning because you're looking across hybrid cloud environments. This is a hybrid app that has components in the public cloud. It has components in the on-premises infrastructure. You're pulling that all in, you're processing and actually figuring out what needs to happen to solve this problem.
Large data sets, so no other way to be able to do it, especially in terms of providing that feedback almost in real time. All right. The beauty of this is all you do is hit apply. And when Danny talked about the finger pointing before, what happens now is much hard to do that because once you understand what the other team is working on and
see the same data.
It's hard to demonize somebody when you start working with them, right?
Yep.
Usually it's easy to point fingers. Now the teams are actually seeing this in the specific tool. So the infra ops team is seeing this in more an Intersight tool. The AppD teams are seeing it more in the AppD tool.
Yep.
So you have the same correlated data. So the team's already working on it. And this example is where, how can you get proactive and address an issue before it actually comes back and haunts you from a user experience standpoint?
So you've now got the recommendation. We had a problem with next-gen financial. Can you now fix it and make it better for me?
Yep, it's as easy as applying
there we
it.
go. So
it's all green. I know you like to look at green.
I like green. That's perfect.
Green in many more ways, not just that dollar sign out there.
Not just that, everything green.
But the second example that I hear from customers very often is, look, troubleshooting, number one on my list, right? I want to make sure that my users have the best experience. But the second thing that comes up very often is, look, I live in this hybrid multi-cloud world, and I talked about before, 90% of our customers will use resources on premises, in a private cloud, multiple public clouds. How do I optimize my resources and continue to save money so that every few cents actually does matter, because when you're looking at the individual workload and applications. So let's go into that. And this is now, if you look at Intersight, it's got 3 views. It's got an on-prem view, it's got a hybrid view, and just a cloud view. I mean, I think you can see that up there. This is actually showing you the hybrid view. And the hybrid view now shows you the resources that are on premises as well as in the cloud. And Intersight makes API calls to pretty much all the cloud providers that are out there, not just the 3 top cloud providers that we usually know. And it's building out this. So let me go through this as we showed on main stage. You've got a number of actions. There's like 11 critical actions. I won't touch on those. I'll go with the much more easier minor actions in terms of clicking on that. And it starts giving you a whole host of, of actions that you can take. Now, think about these. There are some of which you can actually optimize the tool in such a way that some of these actions could be automated. Other actions that are much more intrusive are something that come with where you have to take action. Right. It's not done in a much more automated way. Like this would be one example of where it says, look, when you look at this, related to the cloud, you have an instance type that probably is a little bit cheaper, a few cents cheaper.
Sure. And
you can use that instead of the instance type that you have. Now, as we all know, when you look at, the cloud's supposed to make everything easy, but the choices that we get with cloud is massive.
Can be overwhelming, yeah.
Right? It's almost like every day there's something new in terms of what you get with the cloud. And when you look at just even one example, I'm just taking one example of instance types out here, it comes very fine-tuned. It's tuned for, here's your compute capacity, here's your storage capacity, here's your storage bandwidth and network bandwidth. And when you look at that, you go, okay, that's great. And you have a specific rate card. And it's a menu, so you don't get to customize it. You pick what's available, and you go, this is the most optimal for when I'm deploying my application. And that's important. But the question is, your application is not static. It moves and changes, right? There's conditions that are changing.
Of course.
So how do you optimize for those resources to say, hey, there's a new instance type that's available. This is much better suited. This gives you the granular information in terms of the savings that you can get.
So you're now applying that machine learning now to cost optimization.
Exactly.
So we have both the closed loop operating model for troubleshooting, but also now the ability to save cost in a cloud world.
And we, by the way, haven't seen anything that's been done similarly, because just like we did in the past with Intersight, we did this at the infrastructure level. We've seen others do this at the virtualization layer. Mm-hmm. You guys do this at the application layer, right? Yep. Maybe you can give us this feedback when we look at, this is the first time we're showing that visibility from the infrastructure all the way to the application. This is just the first start. There's a few other things we're working on. That's for another session. So Danny, thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. Appreciate it.
Really
Great stuff.
Appreciate you being here. So Danny and I talked about kind of the closed loop operating model. How do we break down the silos between the infra ops team and the app ops teams? Kind of do the resource optimization, because we're all living in this hybrid multi-cloud world. These are the two. By the way, these demos are also available in the launch zone as well, in addition to if you go to the world of solutions. So let me segue now and talk about the fact that, when I was saying that more and more of the newer applications are being built using containers. And many of these are actually leveraging Kubernetes. And when I talk to IT teams, the ask is very much around, how do I get an enterprise-grade container platform leveraging Kubernetes? Now, Kubernetes is not just one thing. It's many things. You think about it is, you take Kubernetes, you've got to add something like 20 components. You have your logging, you have your monitoring, you have your registry, you have your load balancing, then you have your plugins for storage and networking. And many of these are open source. I mean, open source it's absolutely fantastic in terms of the speed and velocity of the features that are coming in, the innovation that it's driving. So think about taking different sets of open source components where you sometimes get the drops every day, maybe every week, every month. And you've got to put this together, curate this, test it, validate it. That's not something every IT organization wants to go through. And that's what we're providing today with the Hyperflex application platform. where we're always, by the way, relevant in terms of what's and up to date on the upstream Kubernetes, sometimes even more so than some of the cloud providers. It is managed from the cloud, and it's on Hyperflex, a platform that our customers absolutely appreciate. So that's the other thing that we're launching today, and when you look at it, is mainstreaming container development. For IT organizations to provide things like container as a service, this is really about bridging IT ops to the dev community. It enables those things as like self-service flexibility. Because when you are able to deploy something that's almost like an appliance, and you're revving it for all, making sure that you're bringing in all the velocity that open source can provide, because your developers are sometimes very many times faster than you in terms of what's new out in the market. So you're providing that agility and responsiveness before they even come to you or look at other options that they want to go to. So we look at this as enabling IT to provide that container as a service. Then it's really about bridging these two environments of on-prem and the public clouds. You deploy on the cloud, you develop on cloud, you deploy on-prem. Or you develop on-prem, you deploy in the cloud. Think about this as a develop anywhere, deploy anywhere. We want to make it that simple in an appliance form factor. Now, we talked a lot about what's happening in terms of breaking down the silos, building this container platform. There's a lot of other innovations that are happening across the portfolio. In fact, you'll see it in our world of solutions. We have new CVDs that are out there, especially for data-intensive solutions. There's a Cloudera new CVD that's out there. We've also built very specialized hardware for a high-density AMD EPYC refresh. We have a new box for edge computing. And you can go see what we've done in terms of app modernization with the Hyperflex AP platform. I know it's a lot to consume in a half an hour or even like bite-sized chunks on the main stage. We spend a significant amount of time preparing for Cisco Live because we want to make sure that you have the best experience. So as you can see out there, there's a number of sessions today, tomorrow, and through Thursday that's available for you. I would say you have some of the best members of our team here doing these sessions. You can go to these, you can go, try it hands-on at the World of Solutions. I'd really encourage you to do that. Thank you, as always, for making an investment of your time in us. We really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful Cisco Live. Thanks again.